So Lieutenant Turpitt making a phone call to Sinead O'Connor, 773-431-9888. It is May 2nd at approximately 1:44 p.m.
Hello?
Hi, Ms. O'Connor.
Hi,
Hi,
Todd.
how are you?
Hi. Good, how are you?
Good. Well,
Good.
I appreciate you calling, and hopefully you have a minute to talk with us here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I mean, look, what I'm going to tell you may be useless to you, but I certainly think it may be useful, and it's certainly somebody, obviously, you have to follow the money in these situations,
Right.
As things work differently in showbiz than they work in what we call civilian life. Okay?
Yeah.
There are all manner of ways in which people that do what we do for a living can get drugs.
Mm-hmm.
There are rock and roll doctors, or there are various people. Yeah?
Okay.
Now, in the case of Prince, everyone is mistaken who believes that he did not have a drug habit for the entire of his life. He used hard drugs commonly. Okay? I know this because I spent time with the man. He did not release an album famously, which is called the Black Album. The reason he didn't, he told me himself, was that he had been taking so many dark drugs that he had had a vision from God, and God had told him the album was evil and he was not to release it. Okay? Now, that was 20-something years ago. The man's been using drugs all of this time. On TV, they're saying they don't think he was a drug user. That's a mistake. So the DEA would be mistaken to assume that this, whatever killed him recently, is something that's an anomaly. I've spent lots of time with the man over the years. I've seen him in very frightening conditions after using drugs. Now, I cannot say that I ever saw him use the drugs. I never saw him actually take them. He would retire to another room to take whatever the drugs were, and when he would come out of the room, he would be very violent, very aggressive. His eyeballs would disappear literally from his eyes as if they vanished. He had been very violent, and these women will be coming forward over the time. He had been extremely violent to a number of women in his life, including myself. Several women were put in hospital while poor Prince was under the effects of these medications. Now, obviously, the women were somewhat intimidated when it came to bringing charges, and so poor Prince unfortunately didn't get any help. Okay, now around Prince there is a cabal of very well-known American men. Okay, around all of us in the music business, there are people who will get us what we want, and that person may have various different nicknames. In the African American community, the nickname of that person is the bitch. Right? Prince's bitch is Arsenio Hall. Right? Arsenio Hall is a person who you should speak to. That is a person who would go to get things for Prince. That is a person who I was managed briefly by a man named Steve Farnolli, who sadly died, who had been Prince's manager.
What was his name? I'm sorry, his last name?
Steve Farnolli, Fargnoli. Now, back at the time where I had the hit with Nothing Compares to You, Prince and Steve were in war with each other. They were at court, and I was used as a method of hurting Steve. And what happened was Prince and his little cabal of mates, including Arsenio Hall, Eddie Murphy, various others, for all of whom Arsenio Hall is the bitch, they lured me to Eddie Murphy's house under the pretense of there being some type of celebration of my career. In fact, they spiked me very badly. Arsenio Hall they knew that I smoked weed at the time. I have never been a drinker. I'm allergic to alcohol, and I don't take any other drugs. I was given a joint to smoke by Arsenio Hall on that night, and I left Los Angeles 3 days later. I had been living there, but I got such a fright that I moved back to Ireland. I did not see the joint being rolled, but whatever was in that joint, it was not marijuana.
Okay.
Arsenio attempted to force himself on me while I was under the influence of this drug, whatever the drug was.
Like sexually, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I was so frightened that I didn't bother doing anything about it. I literally packed up me and my children and left Los Angeles 3 days later.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, too, we're talking about Arsenio Hall, the talk
Arsenio
show
Hall,
actor,
yes,
etc. Okay.
yes. Now, Arsenio is the bitch, forgive my language, of Eddie Murphy also. Now, the cabal I'm referring to is Eddie Murphy, Andreas Agassi, the tennis player, Arsenio Hall, and various African-American celebrities, put it that way. But Arsenio is the logical choice, the designated driver, if you like, the person who nobody's going to be looking at who goes to get the drugs.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and just so I'm clear too, when you say the bitch, that's the person that you
In
as a celebrity would go to.
showbiz language, the bitch is the person whose job it is to go get you your drugs, whatever your addiction is.
Okay.
All musicians have an addiction of some kind. Now, when a tour manager comes on board, he'll ask you what your addictions are. Mm-hmm. Some of us will say coffee and weed. Me, that's me, coffee and weed. Mm-hmm. You know, some of us, you know, Horace Andy will say chicken and weed. Right. You know, fucking Amy Winehouse would have said smack and weed.
Okay.
Right? There is always someone who will come to us and ask us what is our addiction, and we will be facilitated in our addiction because it suits everyone to have us addicted.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the case of Eddie Murphy and the case of Prince and these very huge African-American stars, Arsenio Hall was the person whose job it was to go to get drugs. Now, I can't, obviously, neither you nor I can say he's the person that got the whatever drug was that killed Prince this last week. Right. However, I can guarantee you that talking to him and reviewing the last 25 years of the nature of his relationship with Eddie Murphy and Prince will lead you somewhere, because Arsenio is a very cowardly person. He doesn't want to go to jail. He's going to fess up immediately where he's getting the drugs. So what I'm saying to you is, if it wasn't Arsenio Hall getting Prince these drugs, then I am a monkey's uncle.
Okay.
And you know, my own experience of Arsenio and that cabal was that they're a very evil bunch of people, very frightening people. I don't scare easily. Mm-hmm. And I had cold fear the 2 nights that I spent with Prince on the drugs that he was on. He was very violent, very frightening. Okay. His eyeballs literally disappeared out of his head. Okay. As if they dissolved, whatever drugs he was using. They were fucked up drugs that I've never come across. So, you know, this idea that he's only lately been taking these painkillers is nonsense. The man has been on some very scary, hardcore drugs for decades. Okay. I suggest you also interview, he had a band years ago, you will remember, he had 2 women in the band, Wendy and Lisa. Okay. Wendy was in hospital for 6 weeks after Prince beat the shit out of her. Okay. So there are other women. I suggest you track them down to discuss the drugs. They will also know these are girlfriends. Okay. I've lost contact with these women myself, but over the years I had been speaking to them. They're telling me about, look, Prince was a guy who was into some devil worship. And I know this sounds mental, but it's not. There are people who are into it. Mm-hmm. I've been in his house. I know what he was into. He was into some devil business. Now, these girls that he's gone out with not only state he was violent, but the man was able to have shit flying around the room. Okay. He could make that man could make something fly from one end of the room to the other, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just drugs he's into, it's darkness, is what I'm trying to tell you. There's a darkness that you're going to get. You're going to go down a road now in investigating this death that is going to lead you into a darkness that you might not have imagined could exist in show business. Okay. So I'm just going to put you on the path by directing you toward Arsenio Hall, and don't be charmed by him, because follow him and you'll get there, and also find the ex-girlfriends. Okay. Yeah, for starting with Wendy, who was the girl that was put in hospital.
Okay. And you know when that was about, that hospital stay occurred?
He beat the shit out of her. Okay. He broke all her ribs. She's not the only woman he's done it to, and it's under the influence of drugs. The only reason I'm telling you this, mm-hmm. He's notoriously violent to women. He tried to beat the shit out of me. Okay. Only I had to escape out of his house in the middle of the night. I managed to escape out of his house. He had me locked in the house ready to beat the shit out of me because he had gone upstairs and taken some kind of weird drug. When he came back down, he's very violent and the eyeballs are disappearing and I'm scared shitless. and I have to escape down the mountain. This is in Los Angeles, out of his house. So, you know what I mean? He's in the habit of beating the shit out of women, and that's commonly known. I don't know whether you can blame that on drugs or not, but when I'm saying to talk to the girls, I'm not saying, there's no point bringing up whether he was violent or not, it's beside the point. The girls will have info about who was bringing the drugs.
Okay.
The girlfriends obviously are the closest to him, you know. This is the guy that took drugs so much that he had tin foil on the windows of all of his houses. He didn't like light, right? Not a shred of light was allowed into the house.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Now, a guy like that is taking drugs. And we're talking nothing compared to you was 1990, so I'm talking about 1990.
Okay. This is the scenario you're all painting out for me here. This was all kind of around that time frame?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's all I say. Like I say, I would just repeat that if Arsenio Hall is not at the bottom of this, then I'm a monkey's uncle.
Okay. When's the last time you were in contact with Prince? Has it been quite a few years?
No, not since he tried to beat the shit out of me that night. I had to escape out of his house. And then what happened was Arsenio and Andre Agassi and Eddie Murphy summoned me to their house on the pretense that there was going to be some party or celebration of me. And instead, I had obviously been lured there to be drugged. This is why I'm calling you.
Okay, this is
they lured me, yes, and it was a punishment for two things. One, I was being used to hurt my ex-manager, who Prince was taking to court, and two, it was punishment for the fact that Prince had summoned me to his house to talk to me about he didn't like me using bad language in my interviews, and I told him to go fuck himself.
Okay.
And then he started trying to beat me up.
Okay.
And as punishment for that is why I was then lured to the other house a few weeks later. Arsenio Hall took me to an Andre Agassi tennis match, and he then took me to Eddie Murphy's house, and they all went upstairs, leaving me alone for quite some time. When they came back down, they were all laughing and giggling. I, being Irish, was quite innocent. They gave me this joint to smoke, because they were always slagging me off that I smoked weed and I didn't take any other drugs or drink. And they gave me this joint to smoke, and of course I had never suspected they could have done anything to it.
Right.
But I couldn't tell you what was in it, but it was not marijuana. I was completely, utterly incapacitated off my face. Drugs.
Okay.
And I'm strong-minded enough that I knew I'd been spiked, and I got Arsenio to bring me home. But in the car on the way home, he did try to force himself on me. Okay. But I was smart enough to make noise and get him off me, and I was close enough to home and famous enough that he didn't take it any further.
Okay.
These are some very dangerous people.
Okay.
Showbiz, you get away with murder, you know, literally.
Okay.
So I don't, you know, you'd be mistaken to think that Prince was not a hard drug user for the entire of his career.
Okay.
And, yeah, check out Arsenio Hall and certainly the ex-girlfriends, any and all ex-girlfriends.
They would have been privy to the use and stuff that you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
I would also suggest you investigate the circumstances around the death of his half-brother, Dwayne, because when I was in the house the night that I escaped, Dwayne was subject to the same level of violence, and when I heard this morning that he's dead, I want to make sure he died safely.
Okay.
Prince was not a very nice man.
Okay.
I always joke that they didn't call him Prince for nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what we are, as you know, the case is being investigated, his death, and we are working, kind of assisting Carver County, which is where Paisley Park is.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a call and make sure that they know this stuff. If they have any additional questions of you, would it be okay for me to give them that 773
Absolutely.
number that you gave me?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
And if you can think of anything else that you would think would be important, you have my direct number as well, and then
Absolutely.
If anything else comes up, we'd be certainly happy to.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just saying, be very careful with Arsenio Hall. And look, I don't need to tell the cops how to do the job. You know what you're doing. He's a charmer, very charming. You'll think you're sitting with the most charming human being on earth. But remember, as your mother used to tell you, the devil is a gentleman.
Yes.
And you're dealing with devil business here. Prince and these people are into devil business, unfortunately. It sounds crazy, but it's true.
Okay.
So, enjoy.
Yes. Well,
all right.
We'll certainly look into it. And again, I really appreciate you calling and giving us
all
information.
Right.
So.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Feel free to call anytime if you need anything.
Okay. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right.